It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
Yeah, this is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Spencer's podcast in the new reign of the King. Will, how are you feeling today?
I'm very good, Tiago, very good. Couldn't be better. On this joyous celebratory day of His Majesty King Charles III. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Back home, but I thought I quite liked the outdoor setting last week, so I thought I'd carry it over.
Yeah, so you've moved back outdoors.
Outdoors, just at my own house now. Sorry about
Lovely.
the audio this week. Will is international at the moment. As international as England is from Scotland, but I'm also Tiago might be outside, but I am sadly underground in a basement which has been converted into a Starbucks. So that's quite an adventure in itself. But anyway, you've got to get the good Starbucks Wi-Fi connection. Anyway, so without further ado, I suppose this episode is just mostly going to be on my experience of the coronation and Tiago's few questions on the coronation and ideas and thoughts on monarchy, and all that kind of stuff. Yep. But before we get into that, Will, have you had any time this week to watch something or read something, or what have you been doing? What have I been doing? So I had a little think about this, and as I am in London at the moment, I have been perusing around some interesting museums and art galleries and everything. And you'll find this one quite interesting, Tiago. Oh, yeah. I got to the Sigmund Freud Museum. Oh, boy. It was quite incredible. There's this suburb in northern London called Hampstead. Yeah. It's a really beautiful place. And Sigmund Freud lived there for almost the last year of his life when he was exiled from Austria when the Nazis came in. Yes. He ran away from Vienna, came to England, as all good people do, to Hampstead, and he set up shop in this big, beautiful house, and the house has now been made into a museum. And it was pretty incredible because Hampstead was home to lots of intellectuals and everything. So George Orwell lived in Hampstead as well. So I actually walked from George Orwell's house to Sigmund Freud's house. It was pretty incredible. So it's been completely made into a museum. It's brilliant. So, I mean, you walk in the front, they have the big kind of entrance room, the dining hall, you got the main stairs, and you've got Sigmund Freud and his wife, Martha. They have their bedroom, and then you go into their maid's quarters as well. And they had a daughter living with them, so they had her bedroom, and they had Sigmund Freud's study kind of reconstructed as to exactly what it would have looked like, which was just incredible. They had the couch, the psychoanalysis couch that people would lie down on as he psychoanalyzed them. They had the original couch there. That was pretty incredible. It was just crazy, and the amount of information available, the amount of information on the walls and everything. It just really blew me away. I mean, I don't know. A few thoughts on Sigmund Freud. I think he gets a pretty bad rap for what he achieved these days. I mean, like modern and please correct me if this is wrong, as you're the one actually studying psychology. but you know, his whole ideas on psychoanalysis and the ego and id and superego and everything. I mean, modern psychologists, again, like they seem to disregard his ideas as just a bunch of kind of pseudo-intellectual baloney with no basis in fact. But I personally, I think that is like the wrong idea, the wrong kind of approach to Freud. And that you need to look at him as an intellectual in a more rounded scope. And going through his house really blew my mind as to how much of an intellectual he really was. Like he had tons and tons and tons of books and books and books and books on he had like full collections of Tolstoy and Shakespeare and Dostoevsky. He had archaeology books. He obviously had heaps of psychology books. He had medical books as well on the nerve and the muscle systems and all that kind of stuff. He was incredibly well read. And then something which really, really surprised me was his massive collection of antiquities, like ancient little statuettes and paintings and models and figurines and like ancient pottery and stuff. And something which really got me was, so you go into his office and you could see the setup, and he had like his psychoanalysis couch where his patient would lie. And then he had his chair off to the side, and in front of his chair was this table with all of these little kind of trinkets from like ancient Egypt, ancient Assyria, ancient Ethiopia. And he would look at the trinkets and like try to connect to them and sometimes even touch them while he was like psychoanalyzing the patient on the bed. I never realized he went that deep into connecting with ancient cultures. That was fascinating. But anyway, that was a bit of a rant from me.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have any thoughts on Freud?
Well, Freud's like a fascinating one because you get these sort of like three levels of appreciation for Freud. You get the sort of base level pop psychology. Everyone kind of knows about him.
Yeah.
The basis of his theories. He comes up in every joke about psychology you could think of. And then you've got the second level where people sort of start to learn a bit more about Freud, and they get to really like doubting sort of what he was talking about and sort of disregarding it as this entry-level pop psychology sort of thing. But then you get to like talk to my professors and people like that, and you can see most of our modern psychological theories are based around theories that originally came up with by Freud. And although a lot of his stuff has been disproven, as much as a psychological theory can be disproven, really, it doesn't mean that the vast majority of his work was not valuable at all. It was absolutely valuable, and it's the reason we can sort of think about things in a different way which we couldn't have before. So I think you shouldn't take everything you read about him online as complete fact, in the same way that you shouldn't disregard what he said. So it's like, just because something's not completely right doesn't mean it's not valuable, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I must ask, Will, what made you go? There's so many wonderful museums in London. What made you go to the Sigmund Freud one?
Well, I have a genuine fascination with the guy. I mean, he is more or less one of the main intellectual items of the 20th century. And yeah, I mean, and it was actually quite a lot. It's like suburban North London, so it was actually quite off the beaten track to get to. I was more or less walking through like normal houses that people live in, just down the road, and then one popped up, and it was like Sigmund Freud Museum. But yeah, I mean, and I just saw it pop up on Google Maps, and I thought I'd really like to visit it. And then George Orwell's house was nearby as well, so I visited that.
Yeah. Well, I'll be in London next year. I might go have a look myself.
No, really, you really should. It's incredible. Because everything in the house is literally originally what they brought over from really Vienna with them. Mm-hmm. Every single piece of furniture, every artwork on the wall, everything. It's all original. It's insane. You walk into his office, and his desk is there, and his spectacles are just lying on the table, and his writings are there, and you think, oh my god, it's yeah. I mean, he was just on another level of intellectualness. But yeah, anyway, so that was my kind of artistic experience. But yeah, what about you? Have you been reading or watching anything interesting?
Well, I didn't think it would be that interesting, but Katie and I were just casually watching Bondi Rescue the other day, and an ad came on TV for this show called Parental Guidance, and it looked interesting. It was like different parenting styles, and they were sort of like put to the test, and all the parents from them sort of come together and talk about it. So we watched the first episode of that, and my god, it was so fascinating. Interesting to see what happens when you take an idea of a parenting style to the extreme. Whereas obviously I'm not a parent, and I will never understand what it's like and how to struggle until I have kids of my own. But it seems like what the show was trying to show is if you take like just one style, you're never going to raise a child in a way that's important to them and personal to them. So it was interesting seeing all these people with such extreme styles. Like there was a really strict parenting with like the father was a reverend, and then there was like really gentle parenting where you don't get angry with them, you just acknowledge their feelings and that sort of thing, which is a bit eye rolling. But and then there was French parent styling, which was interesting.
Do they have their own style?
Yeah, I don't know if it's from French people specifically, but it's called French style, and it's where you essentially treat your child as an adult themselves. Like you talk to them like they're an adult, and make them make their own decisions and that sort of thing, while still monitoring them and making sure they're not getting into danger or any trouble and stuff like that. And then they put them through some challenges. Like they had the parents in the front seat of the car and the kids in the back seat, and they were using the kids were telling them where to go, directing them around and seeing how differently they did it. And then other things like they took them to a fancy restaurant and gave them escargot to see how the parents would, and not with any sort of actual challenge in mind, but just to see what the parents did, whether they made the kids eat the escargot or just encouraged them to try it and stuff like that. And they came back and had a conversation about it, and it was really interesting to watch, and I would recommend it if you have, I think, 9 Now. It's on there. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. A little shout out to 9 Now.
The greatest streaming service of all time.
Yeah. No, I actually, I don't know. I think, well, no, I wouldn't say I think about parenting a lot, because that would be a lie, and also a little bit weird for a 19-year-old. But I'd say I often think about, like, the theory of raising children, I guess. Maybe that sounds even more weird.
Yeah.
But I have often kind of wondered, like, how do you do it? Mm-hmm. What are the practices you do? Do you follow one kind of system? Do you follow multiple systems?
Yeah.
And also, like, nervousness and the stress of being a parent and an adult and being like, Jesus Christ, I hope I'm doing this the right way.
Definitely.
Yeah. But I think, were you saying that they kind of came to the conclusion that, like, a moderate mix of everything kind of produced the best child? Or?
Well, I was only watching the first episode, but it seems like they were all taking ideas from one another, and sort of seeing the faults in their own style, which I think is sort of like, it shows how you can take different parts of different styles and sort of bring them together to make and individualize it to the child. You know what I mean? Like, because not every child's going to react the same way to every form of parenting. So I just thought it was very interesting. Yeah. The other one that was quite strange was well, not strange, I guess it was just interesting. Was there was a nature style where they lived out of a tent in the bush, and they just spent lots of time outdoors, and the kids didn't go to school or anything. And they didn't know how to read or write, but they looked incredibly happy and incredibly fulfilled with their lives, which was interesting. But that's what I watched this week.
I mean, it's almost like with the nature side of things, it's like, I mean, and you could look at this as a comment on society overall. It's like, well, if kids like feel most fulfilled and are happy when they can't read, they can't write, but they are like connected with nature, know how to live, you know, they're mindful of their surroundings, they're mindful of animals, they can make good food, and they can live properly. Like, well, maybe why isn't all of society like that? It's like, are we just, you know, brainwashing our kids? Raise them to be like us, to fit into the machine of society. I mean, that's a very cynical kind of anarcho view from me, but you know, it does make one think.
You can stretch it out to that, definitely. It's not like a huge leap to make. But then you could think about, even if, you know, like obviously we value education and stuff like that, but maybe incorporating some of those natural elements, like being outdoors with your kids and spending time camping and in nature, even in just a regular life where you go to school and get an education and spend time in cities, it still could be very, very valuable for them.
Yeah. I guess so.
Anyway,
well, that's interesting. That's cool. Anyway,
the coronation. Will,
the coronation.
You were there. I was watching from home. What was it like? Will, talk us through it.
Oh boy, it was probably one of the most emotional, ecstatic kind of you know, group psychology experiences of my life. So for those of you who don't know, I am in London at the moment, and the coronation, it's currently the 8th of May. The coronation was on the 6th of May. And it was simply incredible. So generally the idea is King Charles III is getting coronated. He starts in Buckingham Palace, and he proceeds down the Mall, which is one of the main roads in London. And he goes along the Mall, and then he turns around the corner, and he gets to Westminster Abbey, one of the oldest religious abbeys within England. And he gets crowned in the Abbey, and they do the whole ceremony, and they sing a few songs. And then he comes back out of the Abbey and goes back along his route back to Buckingham Palace. And along that route was St. James's Park, which is a major park. And so everyone kind of crowds up along the Mall, which is the road that he goes along, to watch him. And I arrived in London on the 5th of May. And I was kind of scouting out around St. James's Park, trying to find a good spot. And then it started getting pretty late, and obviously heaps of people were camping out to get a good spot. And I was like, oh, what? 19. I can probably sleep here and like get a decent spot in the morning. So after 2 trees and a bench, I eventually slept the night in St. James's Park from the 5th of May into the 6th of May, and woke up, and like, you know, there were police everywhere, there were people everywhere all throughout the night. So I was never like worried about safety or anything.
Yeah.
Slept on a bench, woke up, got my position in a pretty good position, and then these older ladies were behind me, and I felt really bad because I'm quite tall and they wouldn't have seen anything from behind me. So I let them go in front of me, which was quite good because they gave me some sandwiches. But I let them go in front of me. But then I think a few others kind of got some other ideas because I let them go in front of me, and then over the few hours we were standing there, people just kind of slowly migrated forward. So by the end, I didn't have that good of a view, but it was good enough so that as the carriage came past, I did actually see King Charles and Queen Camilla. But I fully saw them as real people in the flesh.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, it's pretty legendary. And I saw the coach go past and saw all the troops marching past and the household cavalry and the household infantry divisions. And then there was a big screen in St. James's Park, so I ran over to that to watch the actual ceremony, and that was incredible. I mean, the rain was pouring down in London, as it does. But you know, almost the dogged determination of the British people to stand there and watch the ceremony, and you know, the crown going down on the head and the guns, because we were quite close to Westminster Abbey, we could hear the gun salute go off. So the crown went down, the guns went off, everyone kind of cheered "God Save the King" and the Union Jacks were flying. It was incredible. And then at the very end, I did something a bit naughty, and I actually got yelled at. So as as the king, and it was actually a larger military parade on the way back. So as that parade came on the way back, I ended up climbing up. You know those like massive screens on wheels with solar panels, which like show writing.
Yeah.
One of them, and it was boarded off, but a few people had already climbed up it. So I was like, I'm allowed to do that. So I climbed up it and got a pretty good view for like 10, 15 minutes until a policeman came and yelled at me to get down. So I did. But it was a pretty incredible procession on the way back, and every single British regiment was represented. And along the Mall were the flags of every single Commonwealth country. So the Papua New Guinean flag was there, so that was nice. And then Commonwealth troops as well marching along. But yeah, it was just incredible. And then there was the fly past as well, which because of the weather wasn't at its full extent, but it was still pretty insane. There were lots of helicopters. There was a Chinook helicopter, and a Chinook is, I think, Britain's largest military helicopter. It has 2 blades, and it's massive. And I've only ever seen pictures of them. I've never seen them in real life. So to see 3 of them flying in formation really low, just over Buckingham Palace, was incredible. So yeah, no, it was brilliant, and the atmosphere was fantastic. And filled me with joy. So yeah, that was my coronation experience.
Well, that sounds quite amazing. I'm quite jealous, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was good for you to, like, I don't know, almost accidental timing. I'm sure you weren't planning for the Queen to die and a new king to be coronated when you decided to go to the UK earlier this year. Yeah, I for myself, it was a much more tame experience. I sat at home and watched all the lead up in the ABC commentary, which was incredibly awkward because they had to fill like 6 hours of on-screen time trying to talk about different things. At one stage they were talking about how great and grand it was, the ceremony and everything, and then one of the hosts piped up and started discussing how it's actually really terrible because of all the indigenous land that had been stolen, as these 2 hosts were trying to talk about how awesome the ceremony was, and they didn't really know how to respond because they weren't expecting it. So that was quite something. But no, it was good. Fun to see them like pan over the crowds and spotting people that you like, celebrities and stuff that you knew in there. And it was just, good vibes for the most part, and it was just cool to see in a world where we're so divided. And I know I mentioned the bringing up, but for the most part, people in London seemed very connected. Even though there was protests happening and things like that, it was still cool to see such a massive group of people so happy and in tradition, which we don't see like grand traditions like that happen very often these days. So it was great, and the ceremony was quite astounding to watch, even on the television.
No, the Brits really do pull out all the guns when they get a good ceremony done. So no, it's quite impressive. And I was kind of thinking, like, what you saying about Londoners and the English-speaking world kind of coming together and rejoicing about this ceremony and tradition and everything, and all kind of loving it. It's interesting because, like, I was thinking about it, like, America, the USA, is kind of the economic military policeman and sets the economic standard for the Western world. And to me, it seems like most of the Western liberal democracies follow America when it comes to global tension, when it comes to the global strategic importance and everything. But the Western liberal democracies and the English kind of speaking, or at least the English speaking world, the Anglosphere, when it comes to ceremony and tradition and historical connection, it really is Britain that they all, almost all kind of go to, in a way that the Anglosphere goes to America for economic security, for strategic military security. The Anglosphere goes to Britain for historical anchorage and that kind of national historical psyche, which they can tap into for stability. Which, you know, when Britain is, relatively speaking, I think it's like the 5th largest economy in the world. It's nice that they still have that kind of soft power connection, which is unique and different to what America can offer. And I think that's brilliant. I really do. Yeah. Well, what about the actual ceremony itself? Like, were there any specific points? Did you end up watching the full
I
ceremony?
did. I missed the end bit because we had to go to a party, but I watched it again on iView. I thought it was interesting, and you briefly brought this up in our private talks, but for a ceremony so deeply entwined with the Church of England and Christianity, to see different faiths represented. And I don't know if there was controversy over that or what it was. That's what I was going to ask you about. Was that everyone cool with that, or was there people up in arms about it, or what was the sort of general feeling about it?
I personally haven't seen any controversy. I think if you looked at maybe a bit more of the conservative right-wing media here in the UK, they might have said something, but I haven't really heard anything. It was, I mean, as you said, Tiago, for people who don't know, this is the first coronation in history where multiple faith leaders are represented. So you had the Catholics represented. Did you see the Greek Orthodox?
Yes,
Orthodox Church? He was there. You had, I think there was like 2 or 3 kind of non-denomination, miscellaneous kind of people represented. You had rabbis. It was interesting. I mean, me, like, personally, my view on it, I'm kind of divided, because it's like King Charles, I mean, not to snub other religions, but the point of him is that he is the head of the Church of England. Like, he is the pinnacle of Anglicanism. He is that connection with God, from like God to Anglicanism to that Protestantism. So I almost like, it's not that wouldn't invite the other faith leaders to snub them or to show that you're superior to them, but it's almost like you wouldn't invite them because it doesn't really make sense for them to be there. Like, if you understand what I mean, like that. It's like, Catholicism and Anglicanism and Protestantism. It's like what, like, they are born out of division between each other. They are, originally the Catholics looked on the Protestants as literal heretic. Obviously that's completely different now, and I'm harking back to years ago. But but then the other side of me is like, well, in this day and age, religion and religious people really need to stick together and fight for what they believe in. And just in regards of inclusivity and moderation, and as you said, people coming together no matter their differences, I suppose that was welcome. But again, just as him being a representative of the Anglican Church of God, it seems odd for him to then kind of, almost seek guidance and kind of permission from those other faiths. But so I'm a bit divided. But that was that.
I see what you're saying about the tradition, but I almost wonder, and it is like very intertwined. Like, the king is supposedly chosen by God. But I almost think it might be more important to have that representation there, in terms of people are sort of starting to stray away from the monarchy more and more as time goes on, and just England itself is such a multicultural place today with lots of different religions and ideas within it, and that's not even counting all of the various Commonwealth countries where you expand that pool of religions even more. So I wonder if they decided, well, people are already feeling this kind of disconnect. We don't really want people to feel more disconnected than they already are by only representing one small subsection of the population. But that's just my thoughts.
No, that's probably a good point. because I mean, you look at India, and that's like 1.4 billion Hindus and Muslims already, right? In the Commonwealth. So no, it's interesting in that regard. But yeah, I mean, a few other things I kind of wanted to point out in the ceremony was I've taken some notes. The Byzantine chant ensemble. So that was the Greek singers doing their chant in Greek. I thought that was brilliant. And of course that pays connection to the late Prince Philip and his Greek connection. There was did your mother end up watching the coronation?
I haven't spoken to her about it, so I can't tell you.
Okay, yeah, okay. I was wondering. I was wondering if she had any comments on the Greekness of it all. Yeah, but and then another point was the Welsh. So Sir Bryn Terfel did this incredibly moving operatic song, the Kyrie eleison, in fluent Welsh.
Yeah.
And again, this is the first time that Welsh has ever been spoken, let alone sung at a coronation. And I was watching that in the crowd, the rain coming down, and him orating in the Welsh. And I'd never heard Welsh sung before, and it's such, like, he just provided such a musical tonal gravitas. And then the kind of, more Celtic Welsh language combined with that musicality was just beautiful. I actually really kind of teared up at that moment. I honestly, I thought it was brilliant, that Welsh song there. Yeah. Do you remember that part?
Yes, yeah. It was great, as you said, and I didn't even know it was Welsh until I sort of mentioned it afterwards. Because I don't really know what Welsh sounds like, and you're right, it was sung like very beautifully, very, very, very good. Yeah.
No, it was brilliant. And then again, this is kind of the inner romantic conservative coming out of me, but all the like odd, weird, intricate traditions of him, like the screens being moved around him, and him kind of being derobed, and then they have to, and it's just like him as a weak kind of frail man in his white shirt, and then they anoint him with the oil, and then all the like proper kind of golden robes go on him, and then there was like the sword and the scepter and the orb and the rod, and he had to like kiss a ring, and he had to put a glove on, and and it was given to him by all these peculiar lords from history. I mean, it's all of that stuff is just brilliant. Right? Honestly,
I've learned a decent amount of British history that made me feel quite ignorant. I didn't realize that there was a Republic period in England where a lot of the crown jewels were melted down, and that's why they were explaining that some of them aren't as old as you might assume. But that was really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure Charles II was it was Charles I was executed by Oliver Cromwell, and that ushered in the Republic. And then that fell away, and then it was Charles II who reformed and brought back the monarchy. And then now we've got Charles III. So yeah. Did that come through in the ABC commentary?
Yeah, they were talking about it.
Okay, that's interesting, because that wasn't mentioned at all in the BBC.
Because they were going through the different items and artifacts and that sort of stuff, and talking about them, which was very interesting. The other thing they constantly harped on about on the ABC was very, very selfish, but no mention, since Australia has been part of the Commonwealth / British Empire, there was always a mention of them during the coronation, and this year there wasn't, interestingly, which they showed some interesting statistics, and only about 20% of Australians cared at all about the coronation, with I think something like 60% not caring, or maybe 70% not caring, and then 10% being like fully against it. So I thought that was interesting. And then, as I've said before, and then you don't mention them, and then people sort of become even more disengaged. But I wonder why that decision was made. Maybe they don't have time to mention every country and.
Well, that's what I was kind of going to say. Is
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, the Commonwealth is massive, and to name, I mean, every single country. And another point to come back at this is actually in the BBC commentary, Australia did actually get mentioned.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, so the coach which Charles went from Buckingham
Oh
Palace
yeah, it was made in Australia, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was made in Australia, and they had this whole segment of like a paragraph in the BBC commentary, like thanking Australia for providing this coach.
Oh, there you go.
And saying how it was built in Australia, and so I mean, and like, you know, in the BBC commentary, India wasn't mentioned, New Zealand wasn't mentioned, South Africa wasn't, but Australia did actually receive a kind of thankfulness for the coach that they provided.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. ABC people complaining about Australia not being mentioned seems a little bit petty to me.
But I do think it ties in a bit to this. I don't know how you feel about it, because it is great power and this great ceremony, and yet people outside of Britain, and I can only really speak for Australia, I can sort of speak for New Zealand, definitely can't speak for India and Papua New Guinea and places like that, but it does seem like people are indifferent to the monarchy, and I wonder if that's different to wanting a republic or what it's about. And we have had a referendum in this country in 1999, where the question was asked, but a lot of people, and it didn't go through, obviously, we're still part of the Commonwealth, but I wonder, and a lot of people blame that on the wording and all these little details and what the proposed thing was that went through. I wonder if it were to happen again, if we would still stay with it, with tradition, or we'd move away from it. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Will. What do you think? I know what you think should happen, but what do you think would likely happen?
Oh, I mean, you might not know what I actually think should happen, because it's a little bit different.
All right.
What you might, but it will. I mean, yeah, the idea of another republic referendum within Australia is definitely going to happen soon.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. To explain to listeners, you know, we now in Australia with the Albanese government, they do have a minister. What's the official title?
I think is just like Minister for Republic or something like that. It's
yeah. What Thistlethwaite or something, I think is the last name. Anyway, so that guy. So it's definitely on the agenda in Australia, and so my views with this, right, is Australia, like, I don't think that it makes sense for the modern state of Australia, with all of its Asian connections, all of its American connections, all of its kind of new, more Middle Eastern connections, all of those modern connections in relation to where it is geopolitically. It doesn't make sense for the head of state, who supposedly represents and acts as the figurehead of all of those unique kind of influx of people, to be the king or queen of the UK. To me, that doesn't make sense. With the modern way of where Australia is going, I think we need to be acknowledgeable and respectful, and look at both sides of what Britain has done within Australia. But we need to look at that historical respect of the British monarchy in Australia. But I think going forwards, I would be in favour of a new settlement. But this is the important thing. I don't think it should be a republic with an elected head of state. So this is where my dilemma comes in. It's like, well, what system are you going to use? Because my appreciation of the idea of constitutional monarchy is fully in regard to the stability it provides, the apolitical figurehead which all people in Australia can unite around. So, going forwards, I think, sure, we should have a new settlement, we should have a new head of state, but it should be apolitical, it should be an unelected, inherited family monarchy, kind of like, I feel like we need to find a new Australian monarchy, and then that opens up a whole new can of worms. I've thought about it a little bit. If you wanted to go kind of really as almost old school kind of conservative monarchy as you can, still related to Australia, there's this really interesting little historical fact where I think currently the heir to the throne of Denmark is married to an Australian, right?
Right.
And they have had kids. So their children is half Danish, half Australian. So you take one of those kids, you put them in to Australia, they still have royal, like legitimate royal monarchical blood ordained by God from Denmark, which is a bit odd, but it's still there.
Yeah.
And they're half Australian, half Danish. And then as they have more children and marry more Australians, it becomes, 3/4 Australian blood, a quarter Danish. And then eventually, as they keep getting more and more Australian, the Danish gets put out. They still have the royal ordainedness from God with the Danish royal blood, but then they're a fully functioning, like, Australian royal family. I mean, the only problem is it's European-based, and it wouldn't really do that much in regards to the representation of Indigenous people.
Well, yeah.
Which kind of takes me to my next point. Is like, okay, if we want a new monarchical settlement for Australia, a new idea of a head of state, how do we incorporate the Indigenous people into that? Because, I mean, population percentage-wise, obviously they don't make up a large percentage of the population, but fundamentally in regards to culture and history and tradition, I mean, they are they are the kind of the keepers of the land, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then that should be respected. So I don't have those answers. I don't have those answers, but I also don't think going into like 10, 20 years down the track, I really don't think, King William, King George will properly kind of represent Australia. Which, I mean, that's why this thing's called fencing, because it's in the middle. And to be honest, it's kind of unworkable. I just think an elected head of state would be a bit of a disaster for Australia.
Why do you...
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I quite like having the British royal family still sort of being our official heads of state, right? And our Governor-General system and that. Whereas they don't really have actual power outside of what's the word, like a traditional power, a cultural power, I guess. There has been things in the past that may suggest otherwise, but ideally, right?
Yeah.
I think that sort of flair may have died with the Queen. I don't know. I feel like everyone was sort of holding on to the idea of a monarch with Queen Elizabeth II because they liked her and she was like a grandma, and I don't know. You could almost relate to her and stuff like that. And then now that someone else has come in, I feel like that history and that bond might not be there as much. And you're right. As it goes on, it's just going to be less and less until what connection do we have? I would like to ask you in a second why you wouldn't suggest a democratically elected head of state wouldn't be the way forward. But I think if we were to go for this sort of idea of an Australian royal family, I think it is really, really important for there to be at least some form of Indigenous recognition there, since a royal family is like it's a historical, cultural thing, and for this land and this place, the historical center of that is, for the most part, within Indigenous cultural practices and tradition. So I also what do you think? Why don't you think that a elected head of state or figurehead would be ideal?
Simply because I mean, it comes down to the old kind of political argument of presidents versus monarchs. So, I mean, an elected president, by their very nature, has to be political, or almost always has to be political. So you look at America, right? You've got Biden. For him to be elected president, he almost by definition has to have some people who vote against him, who dislike him, who don't want him to be his head of state.
Yeah.
And if you look at America now, there's quite a lot of people who really
yeah.
And then you look at before Biden and Trump, there was obviously quite a lot of people who really didn't like Trump. And yet, regardless of what you think, he becomes your national figurehead. And it's like in America, if your head of state is a politician who's elected in, so by definition has to be divided in that vote, it's like, your head of state is meant to unite the nation, is meant to bring people together, is meant to bind everyone in an apolitical kind of sense. So in the regards of unity, I don't agree with an elected head of state. In regards to political stability, I think it's bad. And simple like the political systems of government. So you look at Obama's second term, you look at Macron in France at the moment. What's happened is they've been elected into their second term, but by a whisper-thin kind of vote. And then the parliament, which they actually kind of are interlinked with legislatively, is weighed against them, so that the parliament gets voted in with people who aren't in their party because they're political. So things which they want to get passed can't be passed because the parliament's against them.
Mm-hmm.
So in a presidential system like France or America, that block can occur and things simply don't function, where you have an elected head of state, which is of a different political entity, so the legislature. It's bizarre. Thirdly, again, this is like the more systemic kind of ways of how I think a constitutional monarchy functions better than a presidential republic, is that it divides power. So you look at Trump, and I think the power really kind of got to his head, where you have the head of state and the head of government and the head of the armed forces and everything kind of combined into one, and they don't really know any bounds. Like, they're not really kept down to reality. But with a prime minister, like the British prime minister, once a week has to trundle on up to Buckingham Palace, has to kiss the hand of the monarch. I don't think they do that every week, actually, but they do have to kiss the hand every now and then. But they have to sit down and explain to the monarch, this is what I'm doing, this is what I've done, this is what the people are wanting me to do, this is what I plan to do in the next week. And that's a weekly kind of meeting, and it's almost like the head of government meets and explains what he's or she is doing to the national kind of representative, the epitome, the archetypal representative of the people. It's like he's talking to that.
Yeah.
And it makes them realize that there's something above them. It's like, imagine if the American president once a week had to kind of get out of their dingy office, walk up, get out of the White House, walk up to the Lincoln Memorial or something, kind of kneel in front of this big Uncle Sam and explain to Uncle Sam, this is what I'm doing, this is what I plan to do, this is how it all is going to happen. And Uncle Sam is like, okay, well, that's very good. Maybe here's a few little words of wisdom from my, 70 years of being a monarch, and let me help this guide you. But, thanks for that information. So that division, I think, is far more natural, it's far more effective, keeps the head of government down to earth and grounded in reality, and divides the power, which I think is necessary. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, could you not? And I think this might have even been. I'm not too familiar with the referendum, but I think the idea was you still had the prime minister, and then separately, you would vote in. And I'm not sure if they were apolitical, but I feel like that would be the best way forward. You vote in a president just as a figure that is separate from government, right? And they are so. And I can see where, like, the political standings of that person could affect and could create division. But if you were to just vote someone in based on their personality and what you think should represent the country, rather than policy and that which you can keep with government, I don't see what the issue there would be, where you can still have Anthony Albanese going to this person who has been democratically elected, which means the majority of Australia does fall, like, likes them and believes that they are a good figurehead for the country, to discuss what he's been doing in Parliament, like the British Prime Minister does with the King. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no, it's an interesting point you raised, because, I mean, it's very important, because there is this center ground, which I haven't really mentioned. You know, you've got the far kind of highly presidential system of America, and then you've got the constitutional monarchy system of Britain. But there is this kind of thing in the middle, which is similar to Ireland. Ireland practice it. Germany, they have a president. Ireland has a president. Italy has a president, and then they also have like the prime minister underneath them. So, so it is interesting. I don't know. I honestly don't really know. It's because it's like, I mean, sure. Okay, so let's say you have some kind of national person who feels connected with all Australians, has really put in a lot of effort apolitically to help Australia, has served Australia and is kind of elected by a majority of Australians to be this apolitical kind of leader. I think that would work well. I still have this underlying worry that there is still a lot of possibility of that going kind of wary, like of that going wrong, and someone being elected in who decides to manipulate and utilize the system bad. I don't know, which you wouldn't really get from a. Sorry, yeah, go on.
But could that not happen, like, if someone is born into a royal family? Could they not still be, like, put in a position where they would manipulate and use the things? Just because they're part of a family doesn't mean that they're necessarily morally fine.
Yeah. I think the difference is that I think statistically, if you'd look at it, people like if there's a hierarchy, if there's an inherited family line to the throne, it allows for people, it allows for there to be people put into the throne who they don't have any other choice.
Yeah.
They might be thinking to themselves, all right, I have this ambition, I have this kind of ideas, I want to aim to be elected as this apolitical head of state so I can utilize those powers. If you corner it off and say, no one can be elected, it's this inherited role, people in that inherited role, I mean, look at the British royal family, they're taught by their parents, they're surrounded by civil servants, they have the history to back them up. It's almost like, I don't want to say impossible, but it's really quite unlikely or difficult for them to even begin to think about how they would utilize that power. It's just not really in their blood.
Yeah.
And an example of when it has happened, Edward VIII in Great Britain, his coronation was 1937, I'm pretty sure. He decided to marry the love of his life, Wallis Simpson, who was an American divorcee, which of course wasn't allowed at the time because of the Church of England and everything. And he abdicated because he wanted love over the monarchy and everything. And so there are systems in place where a monarchical crisis can happen, and they can actually be resolved and passed on to the next person swiftly, efficiently, a new coronation, getting a new person in. But Tiago, if you imagine there's an apolitical person voted in, and they start doing some dodgy stuff which isn't in line with the Constitution, they can then argue, well, you can't touch me because I've been voted in by a majority of Australia. Okay, you can't, and then you suddenly end up in this constitutional paradox where in Britain, we could quite quickly get rid of Edward VIII and he could move on, and that crisis could be averted, and the next person moved, King George VI, without any crisis occurring. So, okay. I mean, that's an interesting thing to think about that. But I mean, my resounding conclusion of this whole discussion is that, again, as we always come to on this fencing podcast, it's really complicated. It's really, really complicated. And I need some water because my throat is getting really quite sore. quite passionate about this topic. So it's really complicated, and it's like I worry that for this Republic referendum in Australia, the politicians aren't going to. Well, maybe they are. I really hope they are. But I'm worried that they won't think it through properly. That they'll just rush it through. So they'll come up with some simplistic presidential system, present it to the Australian people. The Australian people don't really understand how it works. It gets passed through, and then it's done. And time should be taken. People should be consulted. Both sides should be consulted, and it should be thought about. But what do you think?
You're right. You really sort of have to get think quite abstractly about what it means to have a monarchy and what it means to have a head of state in order to really come to a sort of smart conclusion. And we're always going to miss little details and things like that. And I don't want to diminish anyone or doubt of our politicians or anything like that. But I really do hope that they think about this and as you said, they don't just jump into something because, well, look at the polls. 70% of Australians don't care about the thing. So let's change this. It's like, yes, but think about this. Think what's going to happen and think about what solutions are going to be in place and what little loopholes that you're going to create and what everything. Don't just rush into this for polling purposes, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Anyway, well, that was pretty good. We got pretty deep there.
Yeah, we did. I think that's about time. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
For listening to the very royal edition of the Fence Sitters podcast. We talked about the coronation and the implications of a monarchy in Australia. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, I guess. Leave a comment. I would like to see what people think about this one. Next week, who knows? Where are you going to be next week, Will?
What date will it? So we're on the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th. I will be in London again.
London again?
So I'm in London. Yeah, I'm in London today. I'm catching a train this afternoon to Cheltenham, which is on the Welsh-English border. I have an uncle there, so I'm staying with him for about 5 days, and then coming back to London. I have a friend coming down, meeting her. So yeah, on the 15th, 16th, I will be in London.
Yeah.
And then a few days after next week's episode, we'll be blasting off into Amsterdam. So that, in 2 episodes' time, I might be reporting from Amsterdam. So we'll see what happens.
So just Will is traveling at the moment, so the things might be a little bit off schedule. Not that they usually are on schedule, but even more so, we will try to get things early rather than late, preferably. But if you just give us some time, obviously recording in Starbucks basements and whatnot isn't the easiest thing to do, and we will talk about something exciting, I'm sure, next week. Who knows what's going to happen in the next week? Maybe eventually we'll even get to the Voice to Parliament podcast. Perhaps.
Oh dear, but anyway, enough of that later. But thank you very much.
Brutal invasion of Iraq.
It's a goodbye
Coming
from
over
us.
Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels.
Hello everybody and welcome to the very first Fence Sitters vlog with one of your lovely co-hosts, William. So, I am in London because tomorrow our new king, King Charles III, shall be coronated. I'm currently in Hyde Park, the central London park. It's bigger than I expected. So yeah, I took a train down from Aberdeen, 7 hours, lovely train, and now I'm here. The atmosphere is pretty eccentric. Massive TV screens have been popped up all over the place for people to watch. There's news helicopters blasting on overhead. Massive swathes of police and security cornering off, large chunks of the procession route and everything. And so this really is quite special. Just come out of Hyde Park. and going under Wellington's Arch, and we've got Wellington over there, and there are police motorbikes, police motorcades absolutely everywhere, and oh, here goes one now, and they're escorting all these like VIP Land Rovers with who knows who's in them. It could be other European royal families, it could be, I honestly don't know, but they're stopping traffic and they're getting them through, and it's just incredible. The atmosphere is insane. I can't even help but smile. Yeah, there's a fleet of like 6 black Land Rovers encompassed by a massive amount of police bikes, and they're running around and stopping traffic and letting them in, and yeah, who knows who they are? European royalty, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Zimbabwean ambassador, who knows? Who knows? Hello and welcome back to the second Fence Sitters Coronation vlog with your host William Brooke. I'm down on the main street in St James's Park, dodging tent poles, which His Majesty will be passing down. There's someone selling flags, and it is 5:30 in the morning, and just, you know, look at the crowds. It's incredible. And I might have gotten a little bit carried away and slept in the park on a bench, but what can you do when in Rome? So yes, here we are. There's a viewing station set up, there's tents all along the street, there's enthusiasm in the air, everyone just feels happy to be here, and I can't wait. So, there'll be more coming. So I'm deep within the crowd along the Mall now, about 2/3 of the way down, and it is just gone 8 o'clock, and there are people everywhere. It is completely packed. But yeah, it's about 2 more hours now. Apparently guests are coming into Westminster Abbey, and lots of processionals from the Metropolitan Police in their finest gear along the Mall, which we've been clapping at. But yeah, we're just in the waiting game for now. There should be some rain coming on later, which I'm prepared for, but not looking forward to. My plan is to glimpse the carriage as it goes from Buckingham Palace into Westminster Abbey, run over to the big screen in St James's Park, which is where I am technically, watch the ceremony, and if I can, maybe head to Buckingham Palace and watch them wave, watch His Majesty wave from the balcony. So there we go. Hello and welcome to the final Fence Sitters podcast Coronation vlog segment. Coronation was yesterday. It's all done and dusted. Sorry about the lack of footage. My camera died and rain was coming down. Well, my phone died, rain was coming down, and I was too excited anyway. But yeah, so the golden coach came past, and I ended up seeing King Charles's face and Camilla's face through the glass, and so it was quite incredible. Big screen in St James's Park for the actual service, which was incredible. A few notes about the service. It was the first time that multi-faith leaders were represented, which was brilliant, I guess. Also, there was a small song in Greek in homage to His late Royal Highness Prince Philip, with that Greek connection there. And then there was also a opera piece in Welsh for the first time. It's the first time that Welsh has ever been used in the coronation. It's quite incredible. I actually found that portion quite moving. But yeah, anyway, so that's all done, and just, I mean, the feeling in London has just been ecstatic. You know, standing in front of the big screen, massive crowd, crown goes down on his head, everyone is shouting and clapping and flags waving and the guns go off, and then, you know, representatives of every military regiment marching down the Mall, fly past with Chinook helicopters in formation. It's incredible. It's really incredible. And now I'm deep in Hampstead, lovely English suburb in London, and I'm just walking from George Orwell's house to Sigmund Freud's house, because, you know, you can do that here. and it's bloody legendary. So that's the Coronation report from Fence Sitters by William, out.